Hey, back with another installment of Lick of the Week, and we're working in blues for these next few videos. And last video we kind of went over what the basic parameters of a blues scale was, the flatted fifth, flatted third, and flatted seventh notes, and we applied those to the fingerboard, and we found this little exercise which would allow us to go between G blues scale, because we're doing it out of this number one shaped G chord for the example. It allowed us to play G blues scale notes and mix in some normal scale notes for G, all within the confines of this shape. So now that we've established that, let's play some licks. I'm going to give you the first lick as a JD Crowe lick, probably back from the early 70s. And most of these guitar licks that you hear that guys like JD and even Earl and Adcock and Sonny Osborne have their foundation in classic guitar solos, like early rock and roll, rockabilly, and back to the early African American blues guitar players. And it's really hard to play blues licks like this on some instruments, and it's impossible on certain instruments, like the piano, for instance, can only play each note a half step apart. You can't bend any notes on a piano unless you want to reach inside there and grab a string, which I don't recommend you do. Trombone, you can slide in between notes. Some instruments you can, woodwind instruments, it's possible to do it, but string instruments are uniquely suited to do some of these things, and the banjo is really great for blues ideas if you just know how to find the notes and apply them to the positions you know, which is what we're doing in this video. So having said all that, yada yada yada, let's break down this first JD Crowe lick. And I'm going to just show you the licks first and the notes themselves for the lick, and then we'll break down how it should feel, because when you play blues licks, it's all about feel. So here are the notes themselves. First string at 5, first string at 3, and I'm going to use a little bar of my index finger here. Second string at 5, second string at 3, using the index for the bar. Choke the third string at 3, almost to a C sharp note, which is the same thing as D flat, blues scale note. Play the first string at 3, release, and pick that note again at 3. Third string, I should say, at 5. Go to the third string at 3, which is blues scale note, and then wind up at 5 on the fourth string. So you have 5-3 on the first, 5-3 on the second, choke, first string, release, third string at 3, fourth string at 5. So if you notice how this lick operates, look at the note placements of this lick. There it is without the choke. Every note that we played fell in within the parameters of that exercise I gave you. The only thing different was we inflected with the third string with the choke, and we did a different order for the notes than we normally would. So there's logic in that exercise. Wow. So I gave you those notes for a reason, because a lot of the licks you're going to play are going to revolve back and forth between the third fret and the fifth fret for G. Now guess what? Because you've used the notes of the chord shape themselves, there were no open strings, you can reproduce this lick anywhere on the neck using the same shape. So what if I wanted to play those notes, say, for A, and make a A blues lick using the number one shape? Same lick. C, F. It's always the same lick, which is great. So that's another reason to take advantage of using your chord shapes to help you figure out these licks. Now, let's break down the syncopation of this lick. It's one thing to know the notes of a blues lick, but a totally different thing to get the right feel. Now, duration-wise, this has a bunch of mixed durations. What do I mean by that? Notes last different amounts of time, and this lick will encompass one measure when you get it all said and done. but the way you get there is a little funky. But funky is good in blues. You're going to play these two notes, if you're counting this in common time, as eighths, 16, quarter, and when you add it all up, even though you have eighths and sixteenths and quarter note mixed up together, it all totals one measure. So let me bring up the metronome. I've got my digital metronome up here in another window. I'll set it for about 58 beats a minute. Now you'll notice that the duration adds a level of syncopation all in itself, but you really need to just work on the feel of the lick. And the bend and release is kind of tough, I know, if you're not used to doing these kind of things. It takes a little extra finger strength, especially with the ring finger, which I'm using. It makes it easier to reach the first string with the index if I use the ring. But I'll leave fingering up to you, as long as you play the notes correctly. And as you'll discover when you play blues licks and you get good at playing a standard version of a lick, like this JD Crowe lick, you'll naturally start to improvise over it and do your own variations, which is what you want to do. But just make sure you get the standard lick pretty close. And remember the X and Y position for your right hand. I'm playing these licks down here, but sometimes I may play them up here close to the fingerboard. Sometimes I may be in the middle of the neck. Sometimes I'll shift back and forth as I'm playing the lick. Sometimes I'll put my palm of my hand on the head to kind of mute it, cut down on some overtones. Sometimes I want the lick to be real rambunctious and loud. I'll float and not really touch much. Sometimes I'll take my finger and lay it against the bridge to get kind of a muting effect. There's a lot of different ways you can approach blues licks, but just experiment, move around. So there's lick number one, which we'll attribute to JD Crowe. Now here's a variation that again goes back to old classic rockabilly, early rock and roll guitar. The lick's going to have the choke on the third string just like we did it in the previous lick, but instead of releasing it to the first string, I'm just going to choke it and then play the bottom two strings where they're being held out of the chord shape. So nothing about the chord's going to change, except I'm going to pinch 1 and 2, and I'm going to choke the third string at 5. And what I'm doing is inflecting that B flat note. So the reason for choking here is so that I don't have to reach up to find that D flat note, which is my blues scale note that's normally not very convenient to find. It allows me to stretch the string up to it, which is another reason you do chokes or stretches on guitar and banjo, is to inflect that blues note. So here's what the lick will sound like. So what I'm doing is just choking, releasing, and then pinching 1 and 2. And then choke and release if you like that sound. And you notice I'm slightly choking the B flat note. You know, that's something you'll get used to doing too. You'll naturally start to play around with different types of chokes, but I'm just kind of inflecting that B flat note a little bit. And that's the lick. So let me fire the metronome up again. I'm going to slow it down a little bit to about 50 beats a minute for this lick. Now let's speed it up a little bit. Back up to 58. That's pretty much the lick. So that gives you two pretty nice ideas to add to your vocabulary. And remember, they're based on the number one chord shape. So I'll see you next week.